Thank you, everyone, for attending my session. For those of you been in my other session, thank you for coming back. As I mentioned, there are some laptop stickers here. If you like, you can come and grab some after the session. OK, so let's talk about Power Query and Dataflow and M. Silent your phones. Make sure you use all past resources. About me, if you haven't been in my sessions before, I'm Reza. I'm Reza. I'm a data platform MVP focused on Power BI side of things. I'm doing training and consulting on Power BI. I'm based in New Zealand, but I'm traveling all around the world doing training consulting. These are my contact information. Feel free to reach out to me. You can ask any questions. You might not get answers. I'll try my best to answer it, but yeah, sometimes I'm wrong. I'll try my best to answer your questions. OK, so before I start talking about this session, how many of you are using Power Query already? OK, that's a good show of hands, like 75% of the room. So I'll go through the introduction very quickly. Power Query, like 2 years ago, 3 years ago, I used to start my sessions on Power Query is a tool for data transformation. It's not a tool anymore. Power Query, I would call it as an engine, as a component that you can use it inside other tools for doing data transformation. Power Query used to be a tool when it was only in Excel, when it was only in Power BI. But we have it now in all of these tools, right? We can use Power Query in Excel, in analysis services, tabular, 2017 or higher version. We have it in integration services. We have a Power Query source. In Azure Data Factory, wrangling data flows, if you have heard of those. In Excel, of course. So it is available in many places, in Power Platform area as Power Platform Dataflows, inside Flow, which recently changed the name to Power Automate. So we have it in many places, and there are much more coming as well. So you are not learning, let's say, a tool. You are learning an engine when you are learning Power Query, a component that you can use it in many places. Now, if you work with data, you might say, OK, should I learn Power Query? Or, for example, I already know T-SQL. I already know SSIS. Is Power Query something that I should learn? I'd say definitely. Definitely something you should consider learning. This is an engine that will give you ability to connect to multiple data sources, do data transformations. Of course, you can do that with SSIS. Of course, you can write T-SQL scripts to do transformations. But you can run T-SQL scripts only on the data that is already loaded into SQL Server database, right, or a relational database system. There are some data sources that you want to connect to that directly, do some transformations, right? And if you compare it with a tool like SSIS, I'm a SSIS fan myself, right? If you compare it with a tool like SSIS, there are transformations that you can do much simpler using Power Query, right? So it is something that you should definitely consider learning and working with that. So next slide, come on. OK, so it is an engine. This engine works with, this engine has two sides. It has a scripting language behind, and it has a graphical user interface. Now, most of you who raised your hand when I said who works with Power Query, you know the Power Query from the graphical side of it. Some of you, however, might work also with the scripting side of it. And that's something that I'm going to show you, right? These two are usually working with each other. When you go and apply a transformation, this is going and writing an expression for you behind the scene, right? The expression side of it is much more powerful than the graphical interface, because somebody went and wrote that, let's say, built that graphical interface for you. It's like a layer on top of what is behind the scene, right? The engine, the scripting language behind the scene is far more powerful than what you see in the graphical interface, which I'm going to show you a few of those, right? And the graphical interface depends on the tool that you are using, has some limitations. Like, for example, if you are using Power Query inside Dataflow, you see that graphical interface doesn't have that many options that we have inside Power BI Desktop, right? Or if I'm going and using it in Excel, there are things that are available there which is not available in Dataflow, right? This is just a graphical interface. Most of these things are available in the expression anyway. Is Power Query something that is not that much powerful? Usually when you see something simple, you might think that, OK, this is simple, so it is not powerful. This is not the case for Power Query. Power Query is a simple tool to do data transformations. However, it is powerful. I used to be SSIS developer. I wrote books on SSIS, right? From like 4 or 5 years ago, I switched to Power Query. I haven't touched SSIS after that, right? I'm not saying SSIS is bad. I'm saying that I can do all transformations that I previously did with SSIS, now with Power Query with no problem at all, right? So it is definitely capable of doing things. That's my message to you, right? I'm not saying leave SSIS to Power Query. I'm saying that it is a powerful language and engine. OK, so talking about this session, when I said Power Query for Data Jedi, I thought, OK, how to put these together? I thought better to show you some demos. So this session is mainly demos. I'm going to show you some demos of cool things that you can do using Power Query. We start from like simple, and then we'll go to more advanced options that you can do with Power Query. Some of those advanced options needs a little bit of scripting as well. So the first demo I'm going to show you is getting data from an email. Imagine this scenario. Let's say I have CSV files, Excel files, on a monthly basis coming to this email address, let's say accounts payable or whatever email address, and they have some information, and sales information, anything, right? I want to analyze those information. And I don't have these information stored anywhere in a database system or anything like that. I want to use that to do a Power BI visualization. So that's the first example I'm going to show you. Here I have a Power BI report. And one thing before I continue, I'm doing all of these in Power BI Desktop, but engine is the same. You can do most of these things, not exactly all of that, most of these things in other tools as well, right? So I go and start with get data. This is where usually you use Power Query. Let me bring my zooming tool as well. OK. So I'm going to get data. Get data. We have all these different sources available, Excel, SQL Server, whatever. I'll go to more. And one of the data sources that I can use, you see we have a lot of data sources. One of those that I can use is Microsoft Exchange. Let's say I have an Office 365 email account that I want to get this information from that, right? So I'll select that. Then I say connect. It will ask me what is the email address that these are coming from. Oops, sorry about this scrolling down. The Podium is not really best thing to do demos. OK, I put it here. OK, the email address is download@redacad.com, let's say. And usually, it asks you to, come on. OK. Usually, it asks you also to do the login. Now, because I previously logged into this email account, it doesn't ask me again. Now, when I connect to my email account as a data source, I have access to all things that are in my mailbox, which is not just the mailbox, but also calendar information, people, accounts that I have under my, let's say, Exchange account, and things like that. In this case, I'm focusing on the emails specifically. So I go and select that, right? OK, I do a combination of this then. And then I go to transform data. Those of you who haven't worked with Power Query, this is our editor in the transform data. This is our editor, Power Query editor, that we go and do our data transformation, data manipulation. We shape the data over here. So what I'm seeing here is actually all emails that have been received in this email address, right? Every one record here is an actual email. And I can filter it down. I can say, OK, give me only those emails that are coming in the inbox folder. I'm not interested in those that are in sent items or any other folders, right? Then I can even filter it based on the sender. Now, sender has has a record of information, which means if I click on that area, I see that who is the sender, name of that, and the address of the sender, so I can see this information. So apparently this was sent by myself, right? So I can see those information. If I want to filter it by the sender, I can also do that, but let's leave it for now. Let's say I'm interested in only in emails coming with this subject. Let's say every month you get an email with this subject line, right? So I can go and copy this subject line and say filter it, very similar to Excel, right? That's a good thing about Power Query. It makes things simpler. I can click on a column header and say text filter, and I say equals to this value, right? And click OK. So this filters it down, right? Filtering actually means that remove all other rows as well, right? But not remove it from the actual mailbox, because I don't have, let's say, access to write anything back there. This is just my read-only view of the content, right? So I have 3 emails. As you can see, I have 3 emails. And these are all sent by different people, let's say. I can see who sent, who is actually 2 participants, CC participant, all those kind of information, the date, time of sending these. In addition to these, I also have these 2 columns. Does this email has an attachment? If it has an attachment, what is the attachment, right? And this table shows me the attachments, right? These are all attachments of that email. Whenever you want to see the content of a table, something like this, don't click on the table, because as soon as you click on the table, this would happen, right? It will navigate down to that table, right? Probably this is not what you wanted to do. You wanted just to see what it is, then do something about that, right? When you click on it, it navigates, then you have to come here, remove that extra step, and do something after that, right? So don't click on the table. Click on an empty cell in that, an empty area in that cell, like this. If I click here, then it shows me like a preview, right? Anyway, this is the column that I need, the attachment column, right? The attachment column. I don't really need anything else. So what I'll do is I'll remove other columns. Now I have a column with a table in each cell. And you see the structure of the table is the same, right? The data is different, however. The structure of the table is the same. Now, when I have a table in every cell, we call this column a structured column. This is not a column that has one date value in it or a text value or a number. It has a structure. It has a table in every cell. I can expand this column to the underlying table structure, right? And how you can do that? Using this little simple button over here, right? I can expand it. It tells me that this table has all of these columns. I want to expand it. I don't want the column name to be like attachment.name, attachment.extension, so I'll get rid of that. And I click on OK. Now I have all of those attachments. These are all attachments from all emails coming with that subject line, right? Now, those files that I'm interested in, those are CSV files, right? You see, I have also extensions. So I can say, OK, give me only CSV files, which is, again, similar to that filtering previously. I would say only give me CSV files, right? And I got CSV files. I have the name of the files, and the date that probably this has been created, the size of the file, anything like that, right? And if I go further, this is the most important part of these files. Every file has a column which is the actual content of that file in binary format. Every file is a binary file, of course, right? In binary format. I can actually get that part, and that means the entire content of that file. And that is what I need, right? I don't need the name of the file, things like that. I can keep that too if I want to. But this is the most important part of it, right? So I'll again say remove other columns, just keeping the attachment content. And now these are binary content of the file. I can click on this, which is similar to expand to underlying a structure, but this time it is working on files. Now, these files, they all have the same structure, right? They all have like 5 columns, 6 columns, whatever. The same order of columns, same column names. Their data is different, right? When I'm getting data from multiple files in the same structure, when I use these combine files options, behind the scene, what happens is that Power Query, this graphical interface of Power Query, will go and look at all those files. We'll consider one of those files as a sample, right? It asks me what is the sample file you want to work with, right? Because I have like multiple files. Do you want the first file to be your sample, the second file, and things like that? It reads the structure of that from there. In this case, because all of those files has the same structure, so it doesn't really matter for me what is the sample. Then I click on OK. Then it will use that sample to build a custom function, run that function for the entire files, combine them together, will show me as an output, which will come in a second. So here is the output, final output. So I have, you see these are the areas of every file. So from row 1 in this case, all the way to somewhere here, row 31. This is the first file probably. Then from here all the way down is like the second file. You see all of these files are combined together using just like these options. Click here, click there, right? Very simple. I haven't wrote any line of code so far for this, right? But this needs some cleanup, right? For example, you see that the column headers are not perfect. Column 1, column 2, column 3, these are not perfect column headers. These are actually column headers. Should be, let's say, column headers, right? This row, for example, is extra. I should get rid of that row. There are some rows with no values in it, right? I should get rid of that. So it's not a clean data set. I'm going to do some cleanup. However, this is the data after mixed all together in one file. If I'm going to do cleanup, if I'm doing it here, I should do based on some rules and logics that works across the entire data set. What if I go and do it on my sample file? Then it will do it for all those files together, right? Where can I find this sample file? Here is the rest of the solution, right? This is the query that I have, which is everything combined, right? But that side, that section that you see, I have a function, I have a parameter, those are automatically generated by Power Query graphical interface. Those are things that are happening on my sample file. So here you see I have the sample file, and I have a function that transforms that sample file using this query, right? This is a query that runs for one of the sample files, right? So if I'm going to change it, I can go and change it here, right? So I'll go to that transform sample file. You see, this is only for one file. This is not for the entire, let's say, 5, 6 files. And I can do my data cleanup here, right? For example, I don't need the first column. There are different ways you can get rid of that. This is one of those. Remove top rows, and I say remove top 1 row, right? Then this first row is going to be my column header, so I'm going to transform tab, use first row as header. Very useful transformation for Excel files, CSV files. That brings that as my column header. Very useful. The last row, as you see, is all blank. I can use a transformation here. Remove rows, remove blank rows. That means if every column, all the columns are blank, then remove that row, right? So this is a clean data, right, for one of those. And the data types are all fine. Now, if I go to my other query, it should be all fine. But when I go to my other query, I see an error, right? In Power Query, transformations comes like step by step, right? And this error that I'm getting at the moment is for actually the last step that I have here. And if I expand this bar, I always recommend to have this formula bar available in your Power Query. Even if you are not going to write a script, at least it gives you an idea what's going on in this script. Now, when you look at this formula bar, why do you think we get an error? Column names, exactly. Column 1, column 2, column 3. We don't have those anymore. We have like dates, steps, things like that, right? So if you couldn't see this formula bar, it was probably harder to find that issue. So I always recommend going here in the View tab, making sure that your formula bar is always visible. OK, now that I know this is because of that, I'm going to remove this step. I don't really need that. So get rid of that step, and everything is fine, right? Because it was only that step that caused the issue. You see now all of the data rows. I just scroll down. You see everything is fine, right? So I fixed it in the sample file transformation. As a result, it fixed everywhere else. The data types are not correct, because one of the things that happens after combining tables together is that Power Query loses the data type of the underlying table. It cannot understand the data type of the underlying table, so you have to set, again, the data type here. One easy way to set the data types of all columns together is this. Select them all together, go to Transform tab, detect data type. Right? And that's it. We got our table ready, right? Have I wrote any line of expression? No. All easy, just drag, drop, click here, click there, right? It makes things much simpler. I'm not saying that you should not write code, right? I'm a developer myself, right? I like to write code. But I'm saying that lots of things are available for you even without writing code. Now, if you can write code, you can do even things that are not available here, which I'm going to show you, right? OK, so what you have seen in this example, you have seen that we had the ability to get data from a data source, do some transformations, and combine it and see those information. Now, there are many other things that you can do, like as an example. And I'm going to show you this one very quickly for you. So as an example, we have a website here, which I usually use for my presentation. This is a website that has movies sales information, bestseller movies of all time, right? OK, I think I came to the probably wrong website. One more time. Box Office Mojo. Yeah, this is probably better. Or maybe they changed the layout. Anyway, so this is the website that has all these movies information in it, right? I can go and select this and even get data from that source, right? We can, of course, get data from SQL Server and things like that, but because those are, I mean, possible and you might have tried that already, I'm not going to show you that, right? So when I get data from a website, it gives me a preview of tables available in that web page, because every web page behind the scene is HTML content, right? HTML content, we have different tags. We have a table tag. We have the IV tag. We have different tags, right? So it can find out the tables in a page, right? You see, these are all those movies, right? Very simple, again. All I need to do is just select this table, click on OK, right? And this brings the entire information over here for me, right? Simple. However, what I'm going to show you in this session are things that you cannot easily do using the graphical interface. Graphical interface is powerful. You've seen that. But let's talk about things that sometimes you cannot use because the graphical interface has some limitation. Example, you might have seen the Power BI report generated from the sessions in Past Summit. How many of you seen that? There is a Power BI report showing all the sessions of Past Summit, which actually Shabnam created that. Shabnam, right? I'm just showing to you. I'm not going to build that report, but it's a report like this. So what this report is doing, this report is looking at the schedule of Past Summit. So Past Summit homepage. Now if I go to the schedule. So in Past Summit website, we got this schedule, all of these, right? And this is a table, right? In previous example, you have seen that I can have a Power BI report getting data from this structure. So what Shabnam did actually was to get data from this page, right? And she explained already all of these steps in her blog post. You can go and have a look how she built it. But anyway, I'm going to show you something specific here. So let's say I go and do the same thing. I say new query from web, from web, and I paste the URL here, right? So similar to previous example, it should work perfectly fine, right? Now, there are scenarios that it doesn't, like here. Right? Now, why that happens, right? We are working in the graphical user interface of Power Query. Graphical interface of Power Query assume some of the things are done. For example, it assumes that your table has always, let's say, these tags. It starts with this tag, ends with this tag. If it doesn't follow with those configurations, then it might come with errors, right? This is one of those examples. If you know how to go and do things in the scripting side of Power Query, you are not limited to what's happening here, right? So if you just know Power Query graphical interface, you get to this stage, that's done. End of the deal, right? It's not like that. So let me show you what we can do, right? I can actually do it this way. So remember, this was the one that I did already for that movies, right? And I go to the first step of that. Every Power Query transformation has multiple steps. The first step is usually the step that we get data from that source, from web page, from SQL Server, from anywhere, right? So this is that step. And you see that there is a function called here. Power Query is a language full of functions. Every function does different things. For example, this function, web.browserContent, it will give me the browser content of a web page, right? The way that it loads in a web browser, right? Now, there are other functions that works a little bit better. Now, I'm going to show you one of those. Now, for this side, you need to know a little bit of like functions, which I'm going to show you in a second. But here is one of those functions. Put my mouse here. OK. So one of these functions is web.contents, right? And when I start typing, you see this IntelliSense, which is quite nice. Addition done by Matt Mason from Power Query team. Really appreciate that. And I put the URL here, right? This was the URL that was not working, remember? I press enter, and it is not working, right? Now, why it is not working? Web.contents come as a content. It's not yet converted to a web page. So let's say, put it inside a web page. That web.contents gone. Inside the web page, right? So I surround one object inside another object, right? And then I get everything from that page, right? How should you know that? That's probably the first question that you have at this stage, right? How you should know that there is a function called web.contents. That web.contents provide an object, an output that can be consumed using web.page function. How you should know all of these things? Two ways. Way number one, Google. You go and search for Power Query function. Way number two, the way that I usually use is this way. You can go to new source, to a blank query. Oh, sorry again. I'm not a really podium person. OK. Putting it. OK. Equal hashtag shared. All lowercase. Power Query is a case-sensitive language. Hashtag shared. Hashtag shared will give you a list of all functions, objects, enumerators, queries, everything in your Power Query environment. This starts with your queries, with your existing queries. You see these are name of my queries, the first few. But then after, when I go scroll down, you see that these are actually functions within Power Query environment, all functions within Power Query environment. This list includes more than 930 fields, right? Every single function in the Power Query environment is already available here. Right? Best place to find about these functions. For example, you want to do something with a web page, so you should go and find something with the web page, right? Usually they start with something like a namespace, like if I'm doing something with a number, it has the number, then dot what the function is doing. Now, how you can search in this structure, right? This structure is not a table. This is what we call a record in Power Query. However, a record can be converted to table. Very simple. At top of this, you see record tools convert, so convert it to table. So when I convert it to table, then it becomes a table that I can go and filter it. I can say, OK, give me a function that the name of the function starts with web dot. Right? Which there are 3 functions. Right? It shows me those 3 functions. Then I can click on any of these functions. It gives me information about all of these functions, some samples about how I can call it, how I can use it. Now, the thing is that not all of these functions has really extensive documentation, but it's a good start. Always good to start to learn about this. Yes?
Can you just pull down on the function bars? Is that
Where do you mean?
is that the whole function in the function bar up at the top? Up, yeah, in the formula. Sorry.
Oh, you mean here?
Yeah, is that the whole? Oh, that's the whole.
Sorry, I didn't get the question.
That's it.
Oh, okay. Okay. No, that's all good. Yes? User-defined functions, yes. So before I go to this step, if I go to here, so let's see what are user-defined functions. So here you see that transform file is one of, let's say, user-defined functions, which is also available here. Right? So it shows you everything. Power Query, I'm not going to talk that much about, let's say, how the environment variables are built. Power Query is a language, right? I mean, a scripting language of Power Query is a language. A language, you can go and define variables in a language. How many of you have programming language background? Any programming? Okay, so easy. Right. You can define variables in any programming languages, right? When you define variables, those variables usually has scopes, right? This is in the scope of this loop structure. This is in the scope of the entire program. This is in the scope of the, let's say, entire application, right? Hashtag shared will give you full scope, everything within your Power Query structure. If I'm only interested in seeing things within my current file, then I use hashtag sections, right? So there are different things. As I said, I'm not going to talk about like environment variables and how they are working. But this way is a way that I usually use myself whenever I'm going to search for a function. And then when I use that approach, you can see things that we couldn't have done before, like these tables, these informations. I couldn't get those informations before. Now I have all of them available, right? So don't limit yourself to what graphical interface provides for you, right? I'll show you another example. Power Query is also available in Dataflows. Now, if you have been in my other session, you have some ideas what the Dataflow is. If you haven't been, so Power BI Dataflows is running Power Query script in the cloud, right? That's a nice car. In the cloud. So I'm signing in to Power BI service. Yeah, coming. OK, now I go to one of my workspaces. And then I can go and create a data flow, right? Create new entities. This would give me similar experience to Power Query in Power BI Desktop, but this time online, right? I have all these data sources. Oh, this doesn't need zooming. All these data sources, files, folders, JSON file. There was a question a gentleman asked me in the middle of breaks that can I get data from a JSON? Can I get data from a REST API output? Yep, all of those are possible. So you can go and select any of these. You can configure it. Now, if you use any of these, now, just to show you that some options are available, if you use any of these, which I'm going to use a blank query at the moment, and let's say I'm going to just open something to show you how it is working, you can go and copy your Power Query script from Power BI Desktop, or you can do a transformation somewhere else, copy that script. And that script, when I'm talking about, is this script. Every Power Query query, when you go to Advanced Editor, this is the place that you see the entire script for that query, right? The formula bar only shows you the script for that single step, right? Like, for example, let's go back here. When I click on every step, you see the formula bar script is changing. But when I go to Advanced Editor, I see the script, the entire script, right? I can go and run that script under here. Now, for this example, I'm just copying a date table script. Right? I'm just copying a date table script over here in the Power Query in the website, let's say in my Power BI Dataflows, and that brings the Power Query editor online for me, right? This is the Power Query editor online, very similar to Power BI Desktop. However, I do not have that much transformation graphical options that I have in Power BI Desktop. I do not have them all here, right? You see, this is much more limited comparing to, let's close this one, comparing to all transformations available here, right? I have much more transformations available here, right? So you might then think that, okay, that means that I don't have those transformations. No, you can still do all of those transformations as long as you go to this editor and write it there. Either write it there or go to Power Query in Power BI Desktop, which is usually one of the places that you have the best graphical interface. Do all your transformations, copy the script, paste it here, right? Because behind the scene, they are all using the same language, right? There are few differences. I'm not saying it's like 100% similar. There are few differences. Example, let's say in Excel, Power Query in Excel, we have a specific function, excel.workbook, which reads data from the existing Excel file. In Power BI, we don't have it because Power BI is not an Excel file, right? It doesn't have an existing Excel file. So very few differences. But apart from those, everything else usually is fine. You can say easily 95%, even more than that, are possible. Yes?
You will need something here that the next time you can do it on the graphical interface?
If it is not supported in the graphical interface, you won't have the option for that anyway, right? If you do something, right, let's say if you do something here, which the graphical interface for that is not available, you would see the final output, right, like this. You would be able to add more transformations to that using graphical interface, but you would not be able to change that specific transformation using the graphical interface because that function is not yet built here. Okay, so let's talk about some more advanced things. So far I've talked about what is Power Query, what is Dataflow, and you learned something really important, right? This is the biggest M I could fit in one screen, right? What is M? M is a scripting language of Power Query. It is called Power Query Formula Language. It's so long that Power Query team themselves, they call it M. M is not the formal name for that. It's the informal name, I think, because it is used in some other tools, I don't know. But M, right? M is a scripting language. There are lots of information how you can learn about M. There is a document provided by Microsoft team themselves, 115 pages. It's like a book, actually. A PDF, you can go and download it. Really powerful resource to learn about M. Now, I'm not here to talk about, let's say, explain M from the beginning, because if I start explaining M in this remaining, how much time we have? In this remaining probably like half an hour, we just get to like defining variables, right? We won't have time to talk about that, right? I'm just showing you some cool things you can do with M, with just knowing few keywords, with just knowing few specific characters, things that you can do which you couldn't do that with the graphical interface, right? So I'm trying to encourage you to all go and learn M after this session. Let's see. Okay, the first thing I'm going to show you is catching error rows, right? That's quite dark slide. Anyway, catching error rows. When you do transformations in Power Query, for some reason, your transformation might fail. Let's say you did data type change, and that data type change failed because, let's say you changed it to date, and that value was a value that couldn't be converted to a date, right? So you get a failure, you get an error. How you can catch those errors, because usually those errors doesn't come really good inside Power BI. So I'm going to show you that as an example. Again, I start with a simple example, and I'll build on top of it with more details. So let me close all of these. While I'm closing, feel free if you have any questions, raise your hand. No? Okay, yep, question?
Same structure, yes.
So if you would try to combine files with different structures,
Good question. So the question is that when I combine those files together, they all had same structure. What if they have different structure? If they have different structure, would I get an error or would it work? It all depends. Depends on how the structure change is and what transformation I did. For example, if one file has column 1, 2, 3, then the next file has column 1, 2, 3, 4. This is not a breaking change, right? My final output have column 1, 2, 4, and the column 4 probably is blank or null for the other one, right? Things like that are simple. However, if these are different, if I build a structure based on, let's say, 4 columns, and somewhere down the road, one of these columns is renamed to a different structure. Or let's say I did a change type based on the column name, like the one that you've seen caused error, which I removed that step, right? Things like those break that. So as long as this is something, the transformation you did is something dependent on the column names itself, then it is very likely to break and give you some error. Otherwise, it just show that anyway. Yes?
You stated in one of your earlier slides that for 5 years, there's nothing you haven't been able to do in Power Query instead of SSIS.
Yes.
I've been making very much use of the SSIS Power Query for things like connecting to the Jira API. Fantastic. But
Yeah.
would Power Query be able to handle replacing an OLEDB source in SSIS that holds, say, 100 million rows? Or is it going to choke?
It is still working. So OLEDB sources are available here as well in Power Query. However, so that's the tricky part, the however part. So if it is like a huge data source, right, depends on some of the data sources. We have something in Power Query called query folding. Depends on some of the data sources, the performance might not be as good as the other data sources. For example, if I'm connecting to a SQL Server database, right? Usually for that, most of the time, we don't use OLEDB connection. We use a direct connection for SQL Server, which is like SQL Server native connection, right? And that usually does query folding. What that means I do my transformation in Power Query. This transformation will be converted using Power Query engine to T-SQL behind the scene. T-SQL will run on the data source, right? Fantastic. Perfect. Now, this, however, doesn't happen always. There are data sources that this might not happen. OLEDB, again, depends on the scenario, depends on what exact data source I'm connecting to that. ODBC connections, these are things that are sometimes tricky. Database to database, they are different, right? So things like that, if the query folding doesn't happen, then this connection would be really slow connection. So like 100 million rows, it would be really slow, right? So there are definitely things that if you try a different approach, you get a better outcome, right? So I'm not saying that Power Query is like the answer to all questions. But the thing is that they are like adding things into that. So that query folding engine is always getting better and better. So something that we are not able to do it today probably should be fixed in a few months, in a few years, hopefully not that long. Yep. OK, so let's go to this example. So I'm getting data from an Excel file, right? And in this Excel file, I have a simple table, a customer table, right? And you can see that this customer table has some columns in it, right? So I'll click on Transform Data. One of the good things about Power Query is that it will tell you that if you have an error in your table or not, right? You see this green bar on top of the column, right? When I hover on it, it shows me, come on, show me something. Yeah, like that, right? It shows me that I have this many valid values, these many errors, empty blank values, things like that. Usually quite useful. We call it column quality information, right? You can even show it much more visible with clicking on View, Column Quality, right? So quite useful information, right? It tells me that how much error values I have in this column, how much other information. Yes?
So I'm curious if that's only on the preview of the first 1,000 rows?
Very good question. So that was exactly what I was going to talk about. So this column quality information is based on the preview of the data. Power Query always works on a preview, right? Why preview? You might say, okay, why preview? Why not on the entire data set? Imagine I'm doing all of these transformation on 100 million rows of data, right? And if I do every single transformation, that transformation happens on the 100 million rows of data, then the second 100 million rows, the third 100 million rows. It takes really long time for me to build that transformation. When you go and write a T-SQL script, you don't say select everything from this table, right? You said select top 100 rows, top 10 rows. To build your query, to build your transformation, then you go and apply it on the entire data set, right? This is exactly what happens in Power Query. Power Query editor runs on the preview of data to make it faster. This column quality information is based on the preview of data. However, you can change it. You can click on here. It doesn't really look like a clickable option, but you can click on this text and change it to be done on the entire data set, right? It should be much better. I mean, it should show a better option for that. But that's how you change it. I won't recommend it for big data set because it makes things small, really slow, but possible, right? OK, so it shows me things like that, right? Now, if as you can see, I don't have any errors here at the moment. Everything is perfectly fine. If I go to Home tab, close and apply, it loads that data into Power BI. Now, remember what I told you about preview of data? So in Power Query Editor, we are working in a preview of data. Now, in Power BI Desktop, when I say close and apply, I'm not working on the preview environment. I'm actually running that transformation for the entire data set. I did not had any error in that step because it was, let's say, first 1,000 rows, first 200 rows. But I have errors in this step because it is running on the entire data set, right? So obviously, one of the transformations that I've done was not working on the entire data set and caused error, right? So how can I get this information without seeing something like this? Because when you build your Power BI solution, you publish it to the website, you schedule it to refresh. You don't want something like this to stop your data refresh solution because there was an error on some of the values, right? You want the refresh to continue, but you want to show a report at the end to your users that these are error rows. Go and see why they are failing, right? So your solution still continues. And that's what I'm going to show you that you can achieve very simply with a really simple keyboard, right? So I'll go back to edit queries. And I remove this column quality because it makes it easier to read. I call this customer table, customer, let's say, original table. And I create a reference from this table. And in this reference, I remove all errors, right? You can call it customer without errors, but we usually don't call it. We just call it customer, right? This is a table that won't have errors. In this case, my error is coming from birth date column. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to birth date column. In the Home tab, I say remove rows, remove errors. Right? That means any error happens on this column, I will not have it in my final output, right? So this would be a table with no errors in the birth date column, right? I'll get to your question in a second. I'll create another reference from this table. I call this one error rows, because you still want to keep those error rows. You want to troubleshoot, right? You want to see what's happening there, right? So in this one, I go to the same column, to the birth date column. This time, instead of remove rows, I go to keep rows, and I say keep errors. Right? This is showing me error rows. You can see I have like 7 rows for error. This is showing me rows that doesn't have any errors. They both actually originated from this. I don't really need that table to be loaded separately. So what I'll do on that table, I right-click and say disable the load, right? Uncheck that enable load means disable the load, because these are the 2 tables I'm going to use. I'm going to use this table for my normal reporting, normal analysis. The other table, I'm going to use it for troubleshooting report, right? Now, before I show you the rest, question?
That was just my question, whether it just fixed the column or whether it took out the
Right, okay, good. Okay, now, what do you think will happen if I say close and apply? Would I get errors or not? I would still get error, right? Because this error value is still there, right? This is still here, right? As long as I have a column with error values in it, that refresh is not going to work properly. So what can I do? I can remove the column, but that's not a solution, because then you won't have an idea of what caused this issue, right? If I click on this cell, I see actually the error details, right? This is the error details. It would be very good if I can have this information in my report, a troubleshooting report. These are rows that failed because of, for example, in this case, because of this, where's my mouse? Okay, because of this value, right? So you should show this information to your users. How you can do that? Remember I told you that with scripting you can achieve lots of things. Now let me show you one of those. So I can go to add columns. I'm adding a custom column. Custom column is usually something that you use often after you use Power Query for a while. You intend to do everything here. One of the reasons for that is that it gives you an expression bar that you can write your M script, right? There is a specific keyword in Power Query, try. Similar to programming languages, right? In most of them we have a try somewhere, right? Try this expression. If that expression works successfully, you'll get the value output. If it doesn't work successfully, then you get a record of information saying that this has an error or doesn't have an error, and what is the error details of that. You won't really get an error, you would get the error message, right? So what I'm saying here is, okay, try that column. What was the column name? Birth date, right? So just try that. Click OK. Here is the output. You see there is no error, right? It's just like a normal column. It has a record. A record can have multiple columns. Here you see that. One has error. The other one is the error details itself, right? We already know that this has an error, right? So that has error part of it is unnecessary for me, right? The part that is important for me is the record. So, right, what I'm going to do is expand it. Remember all of those things I told you about expand? So expand it, but I just want the error information, right? Now I have another record, a record inside another record, right? Now this record has this information, exactly what we need, right? 3 columns. The error details, what is the actual value that caused this error, and the reason for that, right? I need all of these, right? So what I'll do is I say expand it. I put the original column name as prefix, then it would be called error.reason, error.message, error.details, which is good, and click on OK. And here you can see we got all of these as real columns, right? What is the next step after this? Remove the error, yes, get rid of the error column. Because as long as that column is there, I'm going to get an error in my refresh, right? And I don't need this because I have all the details of this column over there now. So I'll go and remove this. That's gone. Then I go to Home tab, close and apply. And this time I won't have any errors. However, I would have 2 tables, right? Normal table, customer table. I use it for my reporting, visualizations, everything I want. And another table, the one with errors, which I use it for my troubleshooting report. I highly recommend you to always have a tab, a report tab in your Power BI report, like exception reporting, showing things like this value is duplicate. It shouldn't be duplicate. This value caused an error, right? Go and fix it, right? So here are my 2 tables, right? As you see here. And then I go there, let's say this is my exception reporting page, and I can put a table here with all of those 3 columns here, which is error details, message, reason, with a little bit better font size. I wish Power BI have a better font size. Okay, so here it is, right? So I have all of those information. So when the user comes to this page, they see that these are errors because of these reasons. Let me zoom in a little bit, right? Because of these values and these reasons, they go and fix it. The next refresh, this would be wiped out. And it would be in my other actual data table that has the actual repos, right? Very simple, using what? Using that keyword, which was try. All lowercase. Power Query is case sensitive. All lowercase, try, right? Try has other ways of working as well. You can say try otherwise, like putting a default value instead, things like that. Yes?
Is it possible to notify, say, the developer of those errors so that they can go in and fix it when the user runs this report?
You can do it some way. So the question, for sake of recording, the question is that, is it possible to notify, let's say, the user that something like this is happening? You can put a card visual in your report, show the number of, let's say, errors, like 7 errors, pin that card visual to your dashboard. In the dashboard, if you have a card visual, if you have a visual that has only one single number, then you can define an alert on top of it. Then you say an alert that if this number goes above, let's say, 213, send an email to these people, things like that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Can you use try at the table level, or do you have to go with the individual?
Very good question. That's my next example I'm going to show you. So, this example I showed you, it's only working if you know what column caused the error, right? This doesn't happen usually often, right? We get the error, and then we see that this is happening from this column. Now, let's say, what if you don't know which column causing error? How much time we got? Should it finish at 12:15 or 12:30? 15. OK, so, OK. So let's say I don't know what column causing error. I want to do that on a table level, something like that. Let's see that as another example. So let me close this one. I show you a different one which has error on multiple columns. And then I'm going to show you how to fix that. We don't have the try option running on the whole table, but you can do a little trick to get it working. So let's say I'm running it on, I think, probably this dataset, which is kind of similar to that table. The only difference is that this time I expect error to appear in multiple columns, not just one column, right? So if I use the same approach, let's say if I call this is my original table, let's say that is original, and disable the load for that. If I create a reference from that and say I want this to be the normal dim customer, the one without error. Now, I want to say, show me this table when there is no column, there is no error regardless of the column. Across all columns, give me a clean data. I don't want any errors. In previous example, when I know what column causing error, I go and say remove errors from that column. In this case, click on this little thing here, right, and say remove errors. So that's remove errors across all columns, right? So that's the clean data. And similar to that, so I would say reference from this. And let's call it error. OK? And same thing. Click here, keep errors. Right? So across all columns, and let me show you. Like here, you see that birth date column, we have errors only in these few rows. It is fine for other rows, but in other columns, like this, I have errors in other places, right? So but that's part of the solution, right? How can I catch the information of these errors? Because they are all in different columns, right? Any suggestions? Try, but I have to run try for every single column. You cannot run try for all columns at the same time. Pivot, or let's say unpivot, right? Unpivot. So so we have to say it this way, right? Let me show it to you something like that. So this is, consider this as my key column, right? This is the unique identifier for every row in my table. In every table, usually you have something like that. We would call it key column, right? If I unpivot everything, unpivot, for those of you not familiar with that, it's like transposing your table, columns to rows, right? If I keep this column and unpivot everything else, then I would have two columns. Column names, their values, right? And then I have all the values here, then I can run the try for that, right? So let's do that. So first, let's call this key column. Renaming is not mandatory. I'm just renaming it to make it a little bit more clear, right? Let's call it key column, OK? Now, right-click on this, unpivot other columns, right? Here comes the tricky part. Unpivot, in Power Query at least, as soon as it hit the first error in your values, it doesn't process the data after that. You see, we have only one row with the error, but in fact, there are others. It doesn't really process those. That's how unpivot works, right? As soon as it hits the error, it doesn't bring those. So what can I do? I can try on the value, but that would be only on this value, only on one of the errors, right? Let me show it differently. So you have to do unpivot, but in a different way. Again, this is another examples of doing advanced things in Power Query. The normal unpivot function doesn't work the way that you expect it to work. But if you know how to write MScript, you can enhance it, right? So let me remove that unpivot step. We are back in this step. And let me bring that sketch environment I have. So I have my key column, right? Oops, sorry, wrong button. I have my key column, right? And using this column, I want to pivot everything else, right? So let's say for this value, I want all of the columns for that. For this value, I want all of the columns for that, right? Something like that. If I could get the current record and then convert that current record to a table, then I would have everything in that scenario, right? So let me show you how we can do that. Again, in M scripting, we have some characters or keywords which are quite useful. I go to add column, add a custom column. There is a really useful character. You never realize that how useful is this character. Underscore. Just that. Right? Underscore means the current row. In your table, the current row in the table would come out as an object. And when a row comes as an object, it becomes a record. That object becomes a record. It has all the column values in it, right? So just that, underscore, right? Click OK. What this is, let me just show you. You'll see what this is. So this is that record. You see, for every row, it shows me the entire row information there, right? What was the point of doing it? When I do it this way, then I can convert it to table. It's like unpivoting, right? So I built my own version of unpivot. I didn't use the unpivot. I built my own version of unpivot. So let's do that. Now, I don't really need any other columns, right? I can go and remove all other columns that I have in between because I just need key columns and that one. So I'm removing everything else, right? I just have every key value and the entire record for that, right? If I expand it, what do you think will happen? It gets back to the place that I restarted, because when I expand a record, it becomes all columns, right? I don't want to expand it this way. So what I'll do is I'll do it this way. I first convert this record to a table. So add column, custom column. And this time I'm using a different function. Record.toTable. And where is the record information coming from? From the custom column. Yeah. Close bracket. So this is basically just converting that record to a table, right? So you see this was the record. This is the table. You see the difference? Table has column headers. Yeah, is it clear? Okay, now I don't need this column anymore. Let's get rid of that. And because this is a table, you can expand it, right? That's unpivot without the unpivot issue, right? You can build your own functions if you know how to play with functions in Power Query. Okay, now we got to this point. The last step, because we have just like 10 minutes, the last step, we only want to run that try for those columns and rows that caused error, right? So I'm going to say for this column, keep rows, keep errors, right? So this means that this is only rows and columns that cause error. Then I can run the try expression here, right? Because I just should say try this value. So add column again, custom column. The rest is similar to what we have done before, so I'm doing that a little bit faster. So try this value, and then get rid of the error value. From this, give me the error. I don't need has error, and then expand that error to all the details. Error reason, error message, error detail, right? So here it is. Across all columns in that table, I run the try statement. How? First, I build my own version of unpivot, because the unpivot doesn't work really good with the error content, right? And the way that I did it was using these two important things. Underscore for current row, quite important. That underscore is very important for the current row. Then record.toTable, which converts your existing record to a table. Then you can expand it, run the try statement, and do the rest, right? Yes?
Can you show us the entire M script for?
Yes, yep. Where we are, here. So the entire M script, this is the entire M script. It might not fit in one window, but yeah, something like that. You're welcome. This is something that probably you also want to run it later on for other tables as well, right? Because this is only for one table. I ran it for the customer table. I want to run it for product table, for employee table, for sales table. I want to run it for all those tables and see their problem, right? Their errors. If you want to run a specific expression in Power Query on multiple places, usually you convert it to a function. The very first example I showed you, get data from email, you've seen it automatically created a function. You can go and build your own function, right? Now, this is the last example I'm going to show you. So let's say I want to build my own function, right? I want this process to be a function. I can copy this M script, right? Then I go and create a new query, blank query. There are other ways to create a function as well. This is one of those I'm showing to you, a blank query. A function is created with this structure, equal. Inside the parentheses, you put the input of your function. Let's say the function input is input table as a table, and key column as text, right? So this is the name of the column. This is the input table, right? These are my input parameters. Then this function generates an output, right? Equal, greater than sign. These two together are specific keywords that separates the input of the function from the body of the function. It says that give me this input, generate this output. What is the output I'm going to generate? All of that expression that I copied from there. Right? So I just defined the input expressions, and I said the output would be coming from that MS script we have generated. But am I using those input variables in this expression? I'm not using it, right? So for example, here that I said the source is that table, this should come from actually this table, right? This variable. So I'm going to replace it. Input table. And also further down, there was a place that I did something else, right? Like key column. I can specify that as well. But let's keep it this way. I don't want to add that much complexity. I'll just press checkbox, and here is my function. I can call this function for the customer table. And the key column, I'm not using that at the moment, but it's customer key, let's say. Invoke. It gives me the entire output, right? I can call it for employee table. I need to use that key column as well in my expression, of course. But you get the point, right? I convert it to a function. I can call this function for every table I have. Yes?
Your function also had the command remove columns and a list of specific columns from the
Yes.
customer table. Would there be a way to generalize that?
Yes. So let's go back to that expression. Very good point. So let me show it to you here. So this had all of these columns with the remove columns step. So if I use a table which doesn't have these columns, then what would happen? Error, right? What if instead of remove columns, I use a different approach? I say keep columns. Only keep my key column and my, let's say, custom column, right? Then it is not dependent on that, right? So in my, let's go back here. In my function, in my query here, where was that removed columns? Here, right? So instead of doing it this way, if I remove it, and I do the step like this, if I say select this one, and this one, and then remove other columns, right? Insert that as a step. You see that this time it only has these columns, right? You have to be a little bit careful when you are creating functions that what functions you are using, that regardless of the columns and things like that, it would work. Then if I copy this, I'll get to your question in a second. If I copy this, let's say, into my function, right, because I copied everything from here, then the only part is this part. Oops, sorry. The only part is this part that I need to change, which instead of customer key, it would be my key column, right? Then it would work regardless of the tables and columns and anything like that, right? Here is the result again. Yes?
In watching this, it seems that it would only work in one of the tools that has collections of queries. I couldn't imagine that this would work in SSIS. Am I wrong?
Because in SSIS, that Power Query source in SSIS, you mean?
Just standalone, yeah.
Yeah, that is only working at one query at a time. Yeah, for that, there won't be a point of creating function because you are working with one query at a time.
Should it work in designing an analysis services model in Visual Studio?
Yes, yeah.
As long as it's amongst your expressions.
Exactly, yeah. For analysis services, it works. And anywhere else that you have multiple tables. Yeah.
Do you have a good way to store and share these functions so that they don't have to be recreated over and over?
Another good question. Can I share this function? I built it once. I want to use it in all my other Power BI files. There is a way, and not very, let's say, simple way. You need to create a custom connector. A custom connector, usually we create it when we have a specific, let's say, data source and we want to configure it for that. However, we can also use custom connector for our own function library. We can build all our functions, custom functions, put it in a custom connector. Whenever we use that custom connector, that would also come like this. So instead of calling a function like web.contents, now you have your custom connector. My, let's say, function library dot give me the error details, things like that. Okay? Right. So I'll just close it down. Resources available for this. I will add some more links into this as well before uploading it to the website. All of these catching errors, examples, things like that, these are links available for that. I would put the links for getting data from email and things like that as well. These are all available as blog articles in my website. You can go ahead and read those through. If you couldn't find these slides, just contact me through the website. I'll send you the slide for sure. And that's it. If you have any questions, please come forward. Thank you for attending.